January 3rd, 2026, 2:00 a.m. Caracas, Venezuela. The night sky erupts in fire. Cruise missiles streak through the darkness. F-35 fighter jets scream overhead. Special operations forces fast rope into a fortified compound. Their target, the president of Venezuela. Within 30 minutes, Nicolás Maduro, the man who ruled Venezuela for over a decade, is in American custody. It was the largest U.S. military operation in the Caribbean since the invasion of Panama in 1989. And it was the culmination of a 6-year manhunt that would change Latin America forever. The largest American naval presence in the region since the Cuban Missile Crisis. 12,000 troops, a dozen warships, an aircraft carrier strike group. All for one man. This is the story of how Nicolás Maduro lost Venezuela to America. This is before the killer. If you missed part 1, I highly recommend watching it first to understand how Maduro rose from bus driver to president. Link is in the description. And if you're ready for this conclusion, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because this is going to be intense. When we last left Nicolás Maduro, he had just become president of Venezuela in 2013. He inherited a country already on the brink, but what happened next would turn Venezuela into a nightmare. 2014, the protests begin. Students take to the streets in Caracas. They demand Maduro's resignation. They're angry about inflation, about food shortages, about corruption. Maduro's response, brutal repression. Security forces fire tear gas and rubber bullets. Government-aligned armed groups attack protesters. By the end of 2014, over 40 people are gone. Thousands are injured. Hundreds are imprisoned. But the protests were just a symptom. The real crisis was economic. From 2013 to 2020, Venezuela's GDP would shrink by nearly 80%. Let me repeat that. 80% of the economy disappeared in 7 years. To put that in perspective, during the Great Depression in the United States, GDP fell by 25%. Venezuela's collapse was 3 times worse than the Great Depression. By 2018, inflation had reached over 65,000%. The bolivar became worthless overnight. People used stacks of bills as napkins because it was cheaper than buying napkins. Food disappeared from stores. Medicine vanished from hospitals. People lined up for hours just to buy a loaf of bread if there was any bread to buy. Venezuelans began losing weight at alarming rates. The average Venezuelan lost 24 pounds in 2017 alone. A grim joke spread, the Maduro diet. People were literally starving. Hospitals became death traps. Without antibiotics or basic supplies, patients passed away from easily treatable conditions. Individuals with serious illnesses went without treatment. Diabetics couldn't find insulin. Babies passed away in their mother's arms for lack of basic medical care. And through it all, Maduro refused to acknowledge the crisis. On state television, he would appear eating empanadas, smiling, insisting everything was fine. "We are at war with the empire," he would say, referring to the United States. "But we will prevail." 2017, the protests return, bigger and more violent than ever. For 4 months straight, millions of Venezuelans take to the streets. They build barricades. They confront security forces. They demand Maduro step down. Maduro's response is overwhelming force. Riot police fire tear gas canisters directly into crowds. National Guard troops use live ammunition against demonstrators. Armed groups on motorcycles, called colectivos, attack opposition supporters in broad daylight. By the end of 2017, over 120 people have lost their lives. More than 5,000 are injured. Thousands more are detained in military facilities. The world was watching. In 2018, the International Criminal Court opened a preliminary investigation into possible violations in Venezuela. Amnesty International released a damning report accusing Maduro's government of systematic abuses. They documented over 8,000 questionable incidents by security forces between 2015 and 2017. In 1 year alone, 22% of all incidents in Venezuela were attributed to government forces. Erica Guevara Rosas of Amnesty International said, "The government of President Maduro should guarantee the right to life instead of taking the lives of the country's young people." But Maduro didn't care about international condemnation. He had a different problem. His people were fleeing. 2015, the Venezuelan exodus begins. At first, it's a trickle. Hundreds of people crossing into Colombia, some flying to Peru or Chile. But by 2018, the trickle becomes a flood. Entire families pack what they can carry and walk across the border. They leave behind homes, jobs, everything they've ever known. By 2020, 1 million Venezuelans have left. By 2023, it's 5 million. By 2026, over 7 million Venezuelans have fled their homeland. It's the largest refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere, one of the largest in the world. They walk for weeks, months, across mountains and deserts. Children suffer on the journey from dehydration and exhaustion. Women are assaulted by criminals and traffickers. But they keep walking, because anything is better than staying in Venezuela. The exodus tears families apart. Parents send their children ahead with relatives, hoping to join them later. Many never reunite. Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Chile, Brazil, all are overwhelmed by the influx of refugees. In Colombia alone, over 2.5 million Venezuelans seek shelter. Cities struggle to provide food, housing, and medical care. Tensions rise between locals and refugees. But the flow never stops. One refugee, Maria, tells her story. I had a master's degree. I was a teacher. I had a good life. But I watched my daughter lose weight every day. She was starving. So I left everything and walked to Colombia with her. It took us 17 days. I didn't know if we would survive, but I couldn't watch my child starve anymore. Another refugee, Carlos. My brother passed away because he couldn't get insulin. He was diabetic. The pharmacies had no medicine. He went slowly, and I knew I would be next if I stayed. These are the faces of Maduro's Venezuela. Millions of people whose lives were destroyed by economic mismanagement and political repression. And yet Maduro remained in power. How? The answer was simple. Venezuela's military. Maduro had learned from Chavez. Keep the military loyal and you can survive anything. He promoted loyalists to the highest ranks. He gave generals control over lucrative businesses, including illicit operations. Yes, illicit operations. Because what the world didn't yet know was that Venezuela had become a hub for organized crime. And Maduro was at the center of it. If you're finding this documentary valuable, please hit that like button and share it with anyone interested in true crime and geopolitics. It really helps us continue making content like this. For decades, Venezuela had been a transit point for substances. Colombian groups would move their product through Venezuelan territory on the way to the United States and Europe. Venezuelan officials turned a blind eye for a price. But under Maduro, something changed. The Venezuelan government didn't just tolerate the trade. According to U.S. prosecutors, they ran it. This network became known as the Cartel of the Suns, named after the sun insignia on the uniforms of Venezuelan generals. According to U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration reports, high-ranking Venezuelan military and government officials were directly involved. They provided protection for shipments. They allowed clandestine airstrips to operate on Venezuelan soil. They gave armed military escorts to planes carrying illegal cargo. They even provided Venezuelan diplomatic passports to traffickers to help them travel freely. And at the top of this criminal enterprise, according to U.S. prosecutors, was Nicolás Maduro himself. Key figures in the Cartel of the Suns included Diosdado Cabello, second most powerful man in Venezuela, president of the National Assembly. The U.S. accused him of being one of the biggest operators in the hemisphere. The reward for his capture, $25 million. Tarek El-Aissami, vice president under Maduro, accused of coordinating shipments and protecting routes, designated a kingpin by the U.S. Treasury. Vladimir Padrino Lopez, defense minister, accused of using military resources to protect traffickers. Reward, $15 million. And Cilia Flores, Maduro's wife. U.S. prosecutors alleged she was involved in laundering proceeds. These weren't rogue actors. These were the most powerful people in Venezuela. And they were running a criminal state. But the Cartel of the Suns didn't work alone. U.S. intelligence documented connections between Venezuelan officials and Colombian armed groups, Lebanese organizations, and Mexican cartels. According to prosecutors, Maduro's government provided weapons to armed groups in exchange for illegal substances. They gave safe haven to international traffickers, and they laundered billions of dollars through Venezuelan banks and shell companies. It was a sprawling criminal conspiracy, and it was making Maduro and his allies incredibly rich. While Venezuelans starved, Maduro's inner circle lived in obscene luxury. They bought mansions in Spain and the Dominican Republic. They purchased private jets and yachts. They sent their children to elite schools in Europe. Maduro's stepsons, Cilia Flores' sons from a previous marriage, were arrested in Haiti in 2015 trying to move 800 kilograms of illegal substances. They claimed they had diplomatic immunity. The case exposed just how deeply Maduro's family was involved in the trade. But Maduro always denied everything. He called the accusations imperialist lies. He blamed the U.S. for trying to destroy Venezuela. And for years, it seemed like he might be right. Because despite all the evidence, Maduro remained untouchable. How did Maduro survive? The answer: powerful friends. Cuba, Russia, China, Iran. These countries had invested billions in Venezuela, and they weren't about to let Maduro fall. First, Cuba. Cuba provided the most direct support. Cuban intelligence operatives embedded themselves in Venezuela's security apparatus. They trained Venezuelan secret police. They helped create Venezuela's surveillance state. They even helped Maduro crack down on dissidents. In return, Venezuela sent Cuba cheap oil, millions of barrels every year. But by 2020, Venezuela's oil production had collapsed so badly that they could barely supply themselves, let alone Cuba. Still, Cuba remained loyal, because if Maduro fell, Cuba's lifeline would disappear. Second, Russia. Russia saw Venezuela as a foothold in Latin America and a challenge to American influence. Moscow provided military equipment, fighter jets, air defense systems, tanks. Russian military advisors trained Venezuelan troops. Russian companies invested in Venezuelan oil fields. And President Vladimir Putin personally supported Maduro, calling him the legitimate leader of Venezuela. Putin had a strategic interest: keep America distracted and weakened in its own hemisphere. Third, China. China had loaned Venezuela over $60 billion since 2007. Much of that money was never paid back. But China didn't care about the money. They cared about access to Venezuelan oil and minerals. Chinese companies built infrastructure projects across Venezuela, and Beijing provided diplomatic cover, blocking international resolutions condemning Maduro. For China, Venezuela was a test case. Could they create a sphere of influence in the Western Hemisphere? Finally, Iran. Iran and Venezuela bonded over their shared opposition to the United States. Both were under heavy U.S. sanctions. Both were isolated internationally. So they helped each other. Iran sent fuel shipments to Venezuela when the country's refineries collapsed. Venezuela provided safe haven for Iranian operatives in Latin America. They even discussed military cooperation. With friends like these, Maduro felt invincible. But the United States was watching, and they were planning. March 26, 2020. The United States Department of Justice holds a press conference. Attorney General William Barr steps to the podium. Today, we announce criminal charges against Nicolás Maduro for narcotics trafficking and related offenses. The room erupts. This is unprecedented. The United States has just indicted a sitting head of state. The indictment, filed in the Southern District of New York, is devastating. It accuses Maduro of leading a conspiracy that flooded the United States with illegal substances, conspiring with armed groups to use these substances as a weapon against the United States, using Venezuela's government apparatus to protect and promote trafficking, and receiving millions of dollars in proceeds. The indictment also charges several of Maduro's top officials, including Diosdado Cabello and Vladimir Padrino Lopez. And the U.S. offers rewards: $15 million for Maduro, $10 million each for his associates. But there's a problem. Maduro is in Venezuela, protected by his military and his international allies. The U.S. can't just waltz in and arrest him. Or can they? The United States has done this before. In 1989, President George H.W. Bush ordered the invasion of Panama. The target, Manuel Noriega, Panama's military dictator. Like Maduro, Noriega had been indicted on trafficking charges. Like Maduro, he refused to step down. So the U.S. invaded, over 20,000 troops. Hundreds lost their lives. Noriega was captured and brought to Miami to stand trial. He was convicted and sentenced to 40 years in prison. The message was clear: the United States can reach you no matter where you are. But that was 1989. The world is different now. Russia and China wouldn't tolerate another U.S. invasion in Latin America. Or would they? Before the U.S. could act, others tried to remove Maduro. August 4, 2018. Maduro is giving a speech at a military parade in Caracas. Suddenly, 2 drones carrying explosives fly toward him. The drones explode mid-air. Maduro is unharmed. Soldiers scatter. The parade descends into chaos. Who was behind the attack? Nobody knows for sure. Maduro blamed the Colombian government and the CIA. Others suspected rogue elements of the Venezuelan military. Whoever it was, they failed. And Maduro's paranoia intensified. January 2019. A new challenger emerges: Juan Guaidó. Guaidó, the president of Venezuela's opposition-led National Assembly, declares himself interim president. He argues that Maduro's 2018 re-election was fraudulent. Under Venezuela's constitution, he says, he is the legitimate president. Over 50 countries recognize Guaidó, including the United States, Canada, and most of Latin America and Europe. For a moment, it seems like Maduro might fall. Massive crowds rally behind Guaido. The U.S. imposes crippling sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton openly discuss regime change. But Guaido makes a fatal miscalculation. He assumes the military will defect. They don't. Venezuela's generals stay loyal to Maduro, and without the military, Guaido has no power. By 2020, his movement has collapsed. Maduro remains in control. May 3, 2020. A bizarre incident, Operation Gideon. A group of armed men, including 2 former U.S. Green Berets, attempts to invade Venezuela by boat. Their goal, capture Maduro and bring him to the United States. The operation is a disaster. Venezuelan forces ambush them on the beach. 8 are eliminated, over 60 are captured, including the 2 Americans. Maduro parades the captured Americans on state television, calling it proof of U.S. aggression. The mastermind behind the operation? Jordan Goudreau, a private security contractor who claims he was working with Juan Guaido's team. Guaido denies involvement. The U.S. government insists it had nothing to do with the operation. But the damage is done. Maduro uses the failed invasion to crack down even harder on the opposition. It seemed like nothing could touch him. But the United States hadn't given up. They were just getting started. January 20th, 2025. Donald Trump is inaugurated for his 2nd term as President of the United States. And Venezuela is at the top of his agenda. Trump had tried to remove Maduro during his 1st term. He failed. This time, he's not taking any chances. Within weeks, Trump begins escalating pressure on Venezuela. August 2025. The U.S. begins deploying warships to the Caribbean. First, 3 guided missile destroyers. Then, 3 amphibious assault ships carrying thousands of Marines. Then F-35 fighter jets are sent to Puerto Rico. By November 2025, the U.S. has assembled the largest naval force in the region since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Over 12,000 troops, a dozen warships, an aircraft carrier strike group led by the USS George Washington. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announces the operation's name, Operation Southern Spear. The stated goal, stop illicit trafficking in the Caribbean. But everyone knows the real target. September 2025. The U.S. begins striking boats in the Caribbean that it claims are involved in trafficking. Small vessels are targeted by drones and fighter jets. The Trump administration says these boats are operated by criminal organizations. But critics point out that the boats are often unarmed fishing vessels. Over 115 people lose their lives in these strikes by the end of the year. Some are definitely traffickers, but others appear to be innocent fishermen caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Human rights groups condemn the strikes. The Trump administration doesn't care. They're sending a message to Maduro, we're coming. December 2025. The U.S. begins boarding and seizing Venezuelan oil tankers on the high seas. Using Navy SEALs and Coast Guard boarding teams, the U.S. intercepts tankers carrying Venezuelan crude in violation of sanctions. The tankers are escorted to U.S. ports and their cargo seized. It's economic warfare. Venezuela's already collapsed economy takes another hit. But Maduro still refuses to back down. On December 31st, 2025, Maduro gives a defiant New Year's Eve speech. The empire wants to invade us, he says, but we will fight to the last. Venezuela will never surrender. Behind the scenes, the CIA is already inside Venezuela. According to later reports, a CIA team entered the country in late 2025. They had a source close to Maduro. Someone inside his inner circle was feeding them information. The CIA tracked Maduro's movements. They mapped his security. They identified his safe houses. And they built a mock-up of his compound in a secret location. Special operations forces practiced the raid over and over. Every detail was planned. By early January 2026, everything was ready. All they needed was the order. January 3rd, 2026, 1:00 a.m. President Trump gives the order. Go. In the Caribbean, aboard the USS Iwo Jima, Special Operations Forces board MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters. F-35 fighter jets take off from Puerto Rico. Tomahawk cruise missiles are launched from Navy destroyers. Operation Absolute Resolve has begun. 2:00 a.m. The first missiles strike Venezuelan air defense systems. Radar installations explode, anti-aircraft batteries are destroyed. Venezuela's military is blinded. Within minutes, F-35s are in Venezuelan airspace, dropping precision-guided munitions on military targets. Fuerte Tiuna, Venezuela's largest military base, erupts in flames. But the bombing is just a distraction. The real operation is happening in Caracas. Maduro is asleep in a fortified compound in the upscale Las Mercedes neighborhood.
He's surrounded by his personal guard, elite troops loyal to him alone.
But they're not ready for what's coming. The Blackhawks come in low and fast. Special operators fast rope onto the roof. They breach the doors with explosive charges. Flashbang grenades disorient the guards. Within seconds, the operators control the compound. Maduro is pulled from his bed. His wife, Celia Flores, is with him. Both are restrained and hooded. The entire operation takes less than 10 minutes. Maduro doesn't even have time to put on shoes. The helicopters lift off. Anti-aircraft fire lights up the sky, but it's too late. The Blackhawks race toward the coast. At 2:25 a.m., they land on the deck of the USS Iwo Jima. Nicolás Maduro and Celia Flores are now in U.S. custody. The president of Venezuela has been captured. But Operation Absolute Resolve isn't over. For another 20 minutes, U.S. forces continue striking military targets across Venezuela. According to Venezuelan officials, at least 80 people lose their lives in the operation. Most are members of Maduro's presidential guard. 2 civilians pass away when a stray missile hits an apartment building. It's the largest U.S. military operation in Latin America since Panama in 1989, and it's a complete success. January 4th, 2026. Maduro and Flores land in New York. They're taken to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, the same facility that held other high-profile defendants. On January 5th, they appear in federal court. Maduro is wearing a blue uniform. He looks tired, defeated. He tells the judge, "I am innocent. I am a decent man. I am the president of Venezuela. I am a prisoner of war." His lawyer argues that the operation violated international law, that Maduro should have immunity, that this sets a dangerous precedent. The judge is unmoved. Maduro is ordered held without bail. His trial is set for March 17, 2026. Around the world, reactions are divided. The US, Canada, and most of Latin America celebrate. A major figure in organized crime has been brought to justice, says US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. But Russia, China, Cuba, and Iran condemn the operation as an act of aggression. "This is illegal," says Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. "The United States thinks it can take any leader it doesn't like." China calls for Maduro's immediate release. Cuba declares 3 days of mourning. In Venezuela, reactions are mixed. Some celebrate. They see Maduro's capture as the beginning of a new era. Others worry. What comes next? Will the U.S. occupy Venezuela? Will there be civil conflict? The streets of Caracas are eerily quiet. Businesses close. People stay home. Nobody knows what happens now. Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's vice president, appears on state television. "We demand proof of life," she says. "The United States has taken our president. This is an act of war." But her words ring hollow. Without Maduro, she has no real power. The military hasn't moved to defend him. The generals are silent. Rumors swirl that some of them secretly supported the U.S. operation, that they were tired of Maduro, that they want a new deal with Washington. Venezuela's future hangs in the balance. But for the Venezuelan people, the nightmare isn't over. 7 million refugees are still scattered across Latin America. The economy is still in ruins. Hospitals still lack medicine. Supermarkets are still empty. Capturing Maduro doesn't fix any of that. It will take years, perhaps decades, for Venezuela to recover from what Maduro did. If it ever recovers at all. From bus driver to dictator. From union organizer to accused international criminal. From loyal revolutionary to international fugitive. This was the journey of Nicolás Maduro. He rose from the slums of Caracas with dreams of changing Venezuela. And he did change it. He turned one of the richest countries in Latin America into one of the poorest. He drove 7 million people into exile. He oversaw a humanitarian catastrophe. He turned Venezuela into a hub for international crime. And in the end, he lost everything. Today, Maduro sits in a Brooklyn facility awaiting trial. If convicted, he faces life in prison. His wife faces decades behind bars. His allies are in hiding or under arrest. His criminal network has collapsed. The U.S. has offered deals to some of his former associates. Immunity in exchange for testimony. Some have already started talking. The case against Maduro is strong. The evidence is overwhelming. But the trial will raise difficult questions. Did the U.S. have the right to invade a sovereign nation and capture its president? What precedent does this set? If the U.S. can do this to Venezuela, can they do it to any country? These questions don't have easy answers. What we do know is this. Nicolás Maduro destroyed Venezuela. Whether through incompetence, corruption, or malice, or all three, he brought a nation to its knees. And now he will face justice. But for the millions of Venezuelans whose lives he ruined, no verdict can give them back what they lost. This was Before the Killer, the story of how a bus driver became a dictator, and how a dictator finally fell. If you made it this far, thank you for watching this two-part documentary series. Please subscribe to this channel for more deep dives into the world's most controversial figures. Hit that like button if you found this valuable, and let me know in the comments, which world leader should we cover next? Pablo Escobar, Saddam Hussein, Idi Amin? Your suggestions help shape future episodes. This is Before the Killer, the story before the crime. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next investigation.